Welcome. I'm Judy with Hope Dementia Ministry, and this is Late Stage Dementia and End of Life. Before we get to late stage, I want to just review the earlier stages as well so you can kind of understand the progression. The early stage is probably the longest, but much of it goes undetected. Early stage symptoms of dementia can start when people are only in their 50s, but we don't recognize it as the precursor to dementia later on. We realize, we need to make more notes, we need to follow the same path, some places that we go so we don't get lost. We might have a little bit more confusion in our lives. We might lose some words here and there. Sometimes there's logical issues. Sometimes people are still working when they're in the early stage of dementia. And, it's like work tasks become a little bit more difficult. They get a little bit confused about things. They're not sure why they can't do things like they used to be able to do things. Sometimes there is social withdrawal. Sometimes there are personality changes. Some early symptoms before we detect anything else going on sometimes can be things like swearing. People who have never been that type of person before might start using foul language just kind of commonly. Um, so a lot of that can go on undetected because we can compensate. The brain is an amazing organ and we can still function almost just as normally as we did before. Just some short-term memory issues and concentration and things like that. When people move into the middle stage, that's typically what most of our sessions deal with. When people, it becomes noticeable that there is a problem, that they have some deficits, they need help with some things here and there. That's kind of what the bulk of our sessions concentrate on, how to handle those kinds of situations. And that's things like increased sleep issues, behaving inappropriately in social settings, wandering, any of these not being able to dress themselves and take care of activities of daily living in the same way, losing the ability to be able to cook and other reasoning skills like managing finances for the home and things like that. So that's the middle stage. That is the longest care stage. It typically runs anywhere. It can run from 8 to 20 years that people need care while they're in this middle stage. And then comes the late stage. Late stage is typically more like 2.5 years. Is where people need complete help with all of their daily activities. They develop difficulty eating and swallowing. There can be considerable weight changes. Someone can really lose a lot of weight, possibly even gain weight, but typically it's more losing weight. Incontinence becomes part of the care process. Um, Sometimes loss of speech, certainly loss of words, but sometimes actually loss of speech as well. Restlessness, people get into a repetitive motion stage where they might start rocking or they might tap their hand on the arm of the chair, something like that. There could be angry outbursts due to sudden confusion or increased confusion. um, and they might even need assistance walking if they can walk at all in this late stage. So this is a stage that has increased caregiving responsibilities. It is the shorter of the caregiving stages, but because the duties increase, it can become much more difficult. So at this point in late stage, people experience the world more through their senses than anything else. So, you think about hearing, touch, taste, smell, these kinds of things. So when we want to interact with them and when we want to make their world more pleasant, it's things like playing music that they like, hand and foot massages, so the touch, that kind of connection, as opposed to conversation or even activity type related things. So we want to prepare their favorite foods. We want to always think not necessarily maybe what is the most nutritious, although we always want to keep that in mind. What will they eat? Um, Brushing someone's hair, sitting outside on a nice day. It's really just the being, the physically being present for someone in this stage. So when we look specifically at care and the kinds of care needs that are going to increase, when we think about eating and drinking, um, you want to keep the person upright while they're eating and a good 30 minutes afterwards to make sure that everything has moved down into the stomach and they're not going to choke on things. They might need to have their liquids thickened so that they don't choke on them. There are products on the market that you can get for thickening foods. You always want to alternate food and drink as they're eating so that they're always washing everything down so they're not going to choke. Um, they might need reminders to swallow. Sometimes people have a hard time swallowing. Sometimes they just forget to swallow. So you might need to actually sit with your loved one and say, chew, 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 swallow, swallow, swallow. And we really need to monitor their weight. You know, if people they're much less active, they don't need as many calories, but when they're taking in far fewer calories, they may actually lose weight quite quickly. Incontinence becomes much more of an issue in late stage. You want to continue your toileting routine that we talked about during middle stage. You know, getting people up to move around during the day, taking them to the restroom a couple times or every couple hours, just to make sure that you're not going to have accidents. But you want to really incorporate your absorbent products into your life, whether it's on the couch, on the bed, on the dining room chair, wearing discreet briefs and that sort of thing. And we want to monitor bowel movements. People don't need to have a bowel movement every day, but if you go more than 3 days, that could be an issue. So we need to make sure that you keep fiber in the diet. If they're not able to eat fibrous foods, if they have issues with their teeth and that kind of thing, you might need to work fiber into the liquids that they're consuming. Want to keep enough liquids and enough fiber going in that everything keeps moving and moving on through. Physical issues like urinary tract infections and prostate problems that can really interfere with the whole incontinence issue. So those are things that come up more and more. There are skin and body health issues. Pressure sores become an issue. And it doesn't just have to be with someone who's bedridden. It can be someone who sits in the chair all day. If they're sitting in the same position, especially bony areas of the body, that pressure can start to wear out the skin. The skin is very thin and delicate. And so we have to be very careful to keep it clean and dry all the time. Preventing freezing of joints. Sometimes if people don't move enough, their joints can freeze. So we have to work on range of motion exercises as people progress through this. Preventing infections and pneumonia. This is typically not many people die just from their dementia disease. There's lots of other things that come into play. Certainly other underlying conditions, whether it's heart disease or diabetes, you know, it becomes lots of issues with all different kinds of body organs and systems that people die from. But when we think about the infections that take people's lives, that's the thing that we have to guard against. And pneumonia is one of the most prevalent. And that's because people often inhale food and that can cause pneumonia to develop. So we want to maintain good oral hygiene as much as possible. Brushing teeth on a regular basis, making sure that there aren't infections and gum disease and things like that going on in the mouth. You want to treat cuts and scrapes immediately. Make sure that you don't let infection start somewhere else in the body. Getting your flu and pneumonia vaccines. That's an important thing that we have to do on a regular basis. Dramatic changes in cognition could indicate a urinary tract infection. If someone is suddenly, very suddenly, overnight, much more confused, it's very likely that they are suffering from a urinary tract infection. If you can get that infection under control, then often their cognition will come back to where it was before. Looking out for pain and illness, we have to think about looking for nonverbal cues. Even through the middle stage, people lose the ability to explain what's bothering them, what hurts them, how they feel. If they feel sick or they feel pain, they can't express it. But people do express it with body language. They might be angry, they might lash out, they might shove you away, but they also might wince, or you can see a pain on their face or something like that. So you need to look for those signs. If someone is moaning, if they have a fever or pale skin or swelling somewhere, those are all signs of illness or infection. And again, sudden behavior changes like anxiety or trembling, those can also be indications of infection. So you can see how dramatic the changes are in care needs. That might mean that you need to provide more care assistance in the way of hired help. If you don't have an extended family who can take on more responsibilities, you might have to hire outside caregivers to come in to help relieve you. Nobody can do this. No one person can do all this care and maintain their own health and well-being as well. So it's really at this point where a lot of people start to bring in professionals to help. And this is also where we need to think about considering palliative care and hospice care. Now, I know hospice is a word that freaks people out. They often feel like that's only reserved for the very end, and they don't think their loved one is at the end yet, and they're hanging on and they're waiting for improvement, or they're thinking improvement is possible. And the truth is that these dementia diseases are fatal. There is no active treatment. So when you think about hospice, that is just for, it's a service for terminally ill people that are not actively seeking treatment. So if someone has cancer and they're getting cancer treatment, they're getting chemotherapy or something like that, they wouldn't qualify for hospice because they're seeking active treatment. But someone with one of the dementia diseases is not seeking active treatment because there isn't any. So they have a terminal illness, and it's really good to consider hospice at this time. You can get an evaluation for your loved one. If they don't qualify, then okay, they don't qualify, but there's no harm in checking it out ahead of time. Hospice is designed for people who have probably 6 months to live. If they have longer to live than that, though, there is something else that you need to consider, need to ask about if you're not offered this through your doctor's office, and that is palliative care. Palliative care is comfort care. It's support for the family, emotional support, medical support. Um, Often palliative care comes into play again with the cancer example. If someone is seeking active treatment, then palliative care comes in to help treat the symptoms of the treatment. So if they're getting chemotherapy and they're having symptoms from that and they're feeling sick and uncomfortable, palliative care is what is available for people who have more than 6 months to live, but they're maybe have a terminal illness, but they're seeking treatment. So palliative care comes in, supports you, the caregiver, supports the person with the disease, and provides a lot of services. So that is something, even if you don't qualify yet for hospice, you certainly can qualify for palliative care. And it's often provided by the same company. Um, in Michigan, there are hospice services that you can actually go to a center, but it's much more provided in your home. Hospice care can be provided in a nursing home, in a memory care facility, in a group home, anywhere that the person lives, hospice services can be provided. Um, my grandfather lived with my parents for the last years of his life, and they used hospice at the end of life. And it was amazing to me, the care that they provided, not just for him but for the whole family. We learned so much. The hospice volunteers and nurses were there to explain every step of the way. They explained what was happening now, but then they also explained the next stages and the next steps that would be coming, so we knew what to expect, and we knew what was happening, and we knew what was happening was what was expected to happen, and all of that kind of thing. It just is so much better than going into this blindly and not really having any idea of what's going on or what to expect. So the underlying philosophy of hospice care is focused on the quality and dignity of end of life. We all know that we're going to die. Death is part of life. It's not the part of life that people want to think about or talk about, but it is going to happen. It's going to happen to all of us. And we want to provide our loved ones with the most dignity and the most comfort during this time of their life. Um, to qualify for hospice, a person has to be deemed that they have less than 6 months to live. But too often, people wait until their loved one is in their last days of life before they bring the hospice services in. Um, and that's just not the way to go. You can get a hospital bed, you can get all kinds of others, all of your waterproof pads and undergarments and depends, all those kinds of things can be provided by hospice services. So it's something that you should look into. Don't wait until the very last minute. You want to provide your loved one with as much comfort and support as they can get right from the beginning. So hospice provides medical care to alleviate symptoms and pain, counseling about emotional and spiritual impact of end of life, um, respite care that allows the caregiver to get some rest. Um, there are some hospice care facilities that will allow your loved one to go there and be there for a few days while you can collect yourself and make some plans and maybe get some rest while you're at home. And then there's also grief support for the family. This is a huge part of the hospice service because grieving is something that you have to go through, and a lot of people don't do it well. They do it unsupported, and it can linger on for a very long time. But the hospice support, as far as the grief support, it can be done sometimes in groups, sometimes individually, but that's a really indispensable part for many, many people. A physician's referral is needed to begin hospice. The team meets with your physician and the family, and they come up with a personalized care plan. Once hospice begins, the family has 24-hour call for hospice staff, any time of day, any time of night. If they need, they can get a hold of someone and someone can be there. You can be on hospice longer than 6 months as long as you qualify. I know a man who was on hospice for 18 months at the end of his life because he didn't get any better. He still qualified under all their different, regulations, but he just kept living. And so maybe because he got that care earlier, it actually allowed him to extend his life. Um, Hospice is covered under Medicare, Medicaid, and individual insurance programs as well. So there is no cost to you. It's an amazing service that provides so much support and so much um, hands-on that you just don't know about when you get into this to begin with. So I really would encourage you to think about it early. When your doctor suggests it for for sure, if your doctor is suggesting hospice care, you need to bring it in, you need to get it started. If your doctor hasn't suggested it yet, then you might want to ask about it. If they feel they don't qualify for hospice yet, then what about palliative care? You want to get all the support that you can at this time. It's never easy to lose someone, and the more support that you have around you, the better it is for you and for you once your life carries on after the death. So I want to let you know that if you need help finding, you can contact me. I can help you find hospice services in your area. They're available all over the state. There's lots of different companies and they, come in all shapes and sizes. And so, there's something out there, I'm sure, that is best for you, that matches up for you. If you have other questions, please don't hesitate to contact me and we can talk about it further. If you have specific concerns or questions that weren't answered in this session, but please definitely look into hospice and palliative care for your loved one at the end stage of life. Thank you for joining. Take care, and I hope to see you again soon.